L'kutei Sichos Chelek Tezvav Vayeshev Dalid Chanukah Lili Nishbas of Yosef Benyamin Ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. What is the primary objective of learning Torah? What did the Eibishter give us Torah for, and what do we accomplish when learning Torah? This is the theme of the Sicha. It is the theme of Chanukah, and it'll also help us understand a pasuk in this week's parsha. In a pirush from pasuk va'boireik ein b'mayim, the Shvatim, the brothers of Yosef, threw him into the pit, and the pasuk describes the pit was empty without water. In Gemara, we find in the Gemara Masechta Shabbos in der sugya von Chanukah. We'll get back to this in a moment. It is in the discussion, in the subject of Chanukah, in the Gemara, it brings up this pasuk and says as follows: V'omar Rav Kana Dorosh Rav Nosson bar Menyumi Mishmei de Rab Tanchum. Rav Kana said, in the name of Rav Nosson bar Menyumi, in the name of Rab Tanchum, Mai dichsiva boireik ein b'mayim. Why does it say the pit was empty? It had no water. I understand already from what it says that the pit was empty. I don't know that it has no water. So what do these words teach me? That it was devoid of water, but it did have snakes and scorpions in it. That's what the Gemara says. Rashi brings this as well. But Pashtus, it does what the Gemara brings the drasha of Abayreik. Seemingly, the fact that the Gemara brings this drasha in the sugya von Chanukah amongst the discussion, within the discussion of Chanukah, therefore, well, die drasha is gesagt geworden von selben Mann der Omar, was gesagt die friedliche drasha, because the author of this statement is the same one who said the previous statement. Omar Rav Kana, Dorosh Rav Nosson bar Menyumi Mishmei Rav Tanchum Ner Shel Chanukah. Over there, previously, it's talking about a menorah that is placed higher than 20 amma, that it is puzzle. And since this was taught by the same Mann der Omar, so therefore the Gemara brings another statement by the same author, even though it doesn't really fit in thematically to this area. But the Rebbe has spoken many times, is yet that inyan in Torah, everything in Torah is perfectly precise. And therefore, when the Gemara brings a drasha in a gewisser sugya, if the Gemara brings a teaching in a specific sugya, is es nicht nur zu libazaitik in Inyan derselbe Balamemer. It's not just for a side reason because it has the same author, the same teacher. Nor der Fall, weil die Drosche hat a tegen dicke Scheiches zu der Sugya in welcher sie wird gebracht. Rather, it's because this teaching has a thematic connection with the subject amongst which it's being brought down. In other words, therefore we must apply this to our subject. As es is da shayches and techen zwischen the memra anam mit ninyan for Chanukah. There must be a connection between this teaching and Chanukah. Ubefratle dem was der Shalosh schreibt in one von unser Parsha, especially according to what the Shalosh writes. As the parashiyos Vayeshev Miketz and Vayigash Avan Hashayches to Chanukah, that these parashiyos, because Chanukah falls out in one or two of these three, Vayeshev Miketz and Vayigash, therefore they are all connected to Chanukah. Under pasuk Va'boireik ein b'mayim steht doch in parashiyos Vayeshev, and this pasuk is in Vayeshev. So therefore it must be that this pasuk Va'boireik and the teaching that is brought in the Gemara in Shabbos, Mayim ein boy, Avon Nechashim Va'krabim Yeshboy, must somehow be connected to Chanukah. So that's our first seif. There's one pirush brought in the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos in the sugya of Chanukah and Va'boireik ein b'mayim, that it has no water, but it does have snakes and scorpions, and clearly there must be some connection between this and Chanukah. Seif base. The Rebbe is going to bring another pirush, another explanation of the words Va'boireik, and going to connect the two pirushim. Chazal sagen ein mayim elo Torah, that water refers to Torah. Therefore, let's move on. From this we understand. As in Torah, when steht mayim is as eich merames of Torah. That whenever the Torah says something about water, it's also a metaphor or a reference to Torah. Especially in this pasuk, where it says the pit was empty without water, is mefurish b'medrash ad retzach like in Torah. The medrash says explicitly that this is talking about Torah. The medrash says boireik. And the words Va'boireik, the boy was empty. Nisroikin boirei shel Yaakov, the Yaakov's well was emptied, referring to his children. The well referring to where his seed would come from. Ein boy mayim, ein boy divrei Torah shenimshulu mayim, and that his children were lacking water. They were lacking Torah. And as we'll learn in the Sikha later what exactly it means, but the Medrash explain, the Mefarshei Medrash explain that the act that these sons of Yaakov did by selling Yosef, or by not knowing what Yosef's punishment should have been for the things that he had done, this showed that they were empty of Torah. So Va'boirek, the boy refers to Yaakov, to Yaakov's children. Ein B'moyim, Yaakov's children were lacking Torah. So we see another pirush on the word Va'boirek B'moyim referring to Torah. Und das ist echt der Pirush Apnimi in der Maimer Chazal Mayim Ein Bei von der Chasam Akravam Yeshbei. This is also the deeper understanding of the first Pirush, that it did not have water, but it did have snakes and scorpions. Ubefrat, especially as the Medrash bring beide Pirushim, that the Medrash brings the two Pirushim, Aleph Mayim Ein Bei von der Chasam Akravam Yeshbei, und Beis Ein Bei Mayim Ein Bei Mayim, Ein Bei Divrei Torah, Behemshech Salazah. In other words, the Sugya in Masechta Shabbos brings Nechashim V'Akrabim Yeshbei. The Gemara in Baba Kama talks in general, not about this Va'boirek. In general, Mayim refers to Torah. In Medrash Rebreishis Rabba, he brings two pirushim. Number one, Nechashim V'Akrabim Yeshbei. Number two, Ein Boi Mayim means Ein Boi Divrei Torah, that there's lacking words of Torah. And the Medrash brings both side by side, implying that they are connected to each other. So what's the connection between the two? And in a sense, what is the deeper meaning of Nechashim V'Akrabim Yeshbei? If a person is in a state that he is lacking words of Torah, he doesn't have the water of Torah, automatically he becomes filled with snakes and scorpions. There's no middle ground. Das heißt, dass der Chisaron von Ein Bei Divrei Torah is nicht nur das, was ist Pust von Torah. The fact that he doesn't have words of Torah is not just the problem that he's void of Torah, und kann bleiben full mit den Yoni Yarishos, and he could remain full with neutral things. Nor in sein Boyer werden beim Derech Mamele Nechashim V'Akrabim Zachem is ein Hepech Umanagit Zukdusha. A person whose well is empty of water, automatically the well is going to become filled with things that oppose holiness. Al derech pirush of Baal Shem Tov. The Rebbe didn't yet finish this. He's going to in a couple of paragraphs. But in the interim, to bolster this pshat, the Rebbe brings an example from the pirush of Baal Shem Tov from Pasuk. V'sartem va'avadetem. We say this in V'hoyim Shemeya Yishamru Lachem. You should protect yourself. V'nifte levavchem. V'sartem va'avadetem elakim achedim. V'sartem, you'll stray. And you will serve other gods. Says the Baal Shem Tov, if a person separates himself from Hashem, immediately he becomes an idol worshiper. There's no middle ground, there's no intermediate space between the two. It's an automatic consequence. And their meat is mavur on this same note. This will also answer a different question. This also will answer the question following this understanding that Mayim Ein Boy, Avon Nechashim V'Akrabim Yeshbei, is saying that if you don't have Mayim, if you don't have Torah, you automatically become filled with negative things. This explains why the Torah doesn't tell us Nechashim V'Akrabim. Why does the Torah have to say Mayim Ein Boy, that it has no water? And we would learn from there that it means that there were snakes and scorpions. Why couldn't the Torah say clearly there were snakes and scorpions? But now it's understood. It's unnecessary to explain. To specify, Nechashim V'Akrabim Yeshbei is b'derech memela teitzof and Mayim Ein Bei. The fact that there are snakes and scorpions is an automatic consequence of the fact that there was no water. And now to conclude this thought, which we started in the beginning of the B'shasmiz and Amatziv. So now that we understand, on the far bring the Medrash these two pirushim in Emshech, so therefore the Medrash brings these two pirushim one after the other. Ein pirush is totally musbar from Satan pirush because one explains and they're interdependent in each other. Das was Nechashim V'Akrabim Yeshbei hat sich genommen b'derech mamela von Ein Bei Mayim Ein Bei Divrei Torah. The fact that it had snakes and scorpions was an automatic consequence of the fact that it was lacking water, meaning lacking Torah. Umehai taima does their future on inyan von Eipach Torah, and therefore it was able to lead to something that is contrary to Torah, to Mechiras Yosef, that ultimately Yosef was sold. In other words, here they threw into the pit. They were planning that he should die there. And then they took him out and they sold him, which was also something that was contrary to Torah. But it all started out with the fact that ein by mayim, ein by divrei Torah, and therefore automatically nechashim v'akrabim yeshbei. They ended up selling Yosef something that's hepech Torah. So far we understand that there's two pirushim. We understand that the two pirushim are actually very strongly interconnected, and they explain one another. Sif Gimel. The Chelek came and fragen. The Rebbe is going to ask two questions in this if. I can understand the Pirush of the Baal Shem Tov and the words, and you will stray and you will serve other gods. Which is discussing the essential bond and connection between the Yid and the Eibishter. Is move on as vi nor visarte mekert sich ab von der Dvekus mit the Eibishter. It's understood that if you stray, if you turn away from your relationship with Hashem, is a shenanin von hepech. It's automatically the only other thing is the opposite of that. Va'avadetem. It means serving other gods. Immediately you are serving if not literal, at least in a subtle way. That turning away from Hashem automatically means that you're going against Hashem. So that makes sense. As he balts is nicht talking Torah, muss bederech v'meile veren amitzias von nechashim v'akrav v'menagit Torah. Here we're not talking about a relationship with Hashem. We're talking about a person that doesn't have Torah. Why is it so certain that if a person doesn't learn Torah or doesn't have Torah, automatically there has to be an existence that opposes Torah? Say the person is empty, and for a while it remains empty, and we'll see what he fills it up with. Why is it automatic that if a person is lacking Torah, he's going to have nechashim v'akrabim, negative energy, negative forces? That's question number one. Another question. It's known that the brothers of Yosef felt or held that according to Din, Yosef is mechuyev misa. Because Yosef is anoichel umisnakish benafsham lahamisam. Number one, Yosef was plotting against them to try to kill them. And therefore he has the din of a roidef. Roidef literally means a pursuer. Someone who's trying to kill you. And the halacha is that if someone is trying to kill you, you're allowed to kill them first. Or other reasons. For example, one reason brought in the Eirach is that they said he had the din of an Eid Zaymim. That he was saying Eidas to Yaakov about things that they did, either Ever Minachai, or that they were engaged in adultery. And one Eid is believed by Bnei Noach, and therefore he was an Eid Zaymim. And based on the din of Eid Zaymim, since he wanted that they should be Chayiv Misa, he becomes Chayiv Misa. So another example of other reasons that are brought in the Mefarshim. Either way, they held that Al Pi Din, according to the din of Torah, Yosef is Mechuyev Misa. Hein verwos sagt der Medrash durch dem was sie haben gewollt hagen in Yosef. Is nisreiken bei Rishal Yaakov ein bei divrei Torah. Why does the Medrash say that? Because they wanted to kill Yosef. This meant that the children, that the well of Yaakov became empty of Torah. Was the fun is mashmas die Shvatim haben sich chas v'shalom nit gerechen mit divrei Torah, which implies that the Shvatim chas v'shalom were not taking into consideration the teachings of Torah. Be'ez ledatom is given al pi din Torah, when according to their opinion they were following the way of Torah. So those are two questions. Number one, why is it so certain that if somebody doesn't have Torah, automatically he has nechashim v'akrabim in his life? And number two, why are we saying that the children of Yaakov engaged in a way that was against Torah, if at least in their minds they were following the way of Torah? So to answer this question, these questions, we'll understand by beginning to explain dem tam was Chazal vergleichen Torah zu Mayim. What is the reason that Chazal compare Torah to water? Torah is Torah is compared to various different things in various different psukim and memori Chazal. For example, the lechem, there's a pasuk l'chu lachmei belachmei, referring to Torah. Torah is compared to bread. Just like bread becomes part of the person, so to Torah becomes part of the person. Then there's yayin. In that same pasuk it says ususu beyayin masachti. Again, referring to Torah. Torah is compared to wine. One of the explanations to that is that just like wine, when you taste it at first, you may not like it, but later you can acquire a taste. So too with Torah, even if the first time it comes very difficult to you, nevertheless, the more you learn, the more you will acquire a taste for it. Torah is also compared to oil. L'deach shmanecha tevim, shemen turak shmecha. And again, there's various different things that with which Torah is compared to oil. Number one, oil gives light, and Torah gives light. Number two, oil doesn't mix with other liquids. Similarly, when Yidden learn Torah, they cannot mix with other nations. Oil rises above other liquids. Similarly, when a Yid learns Torah, he rises above. So there's various. Each of these comparisons, wine, oil, and bread, describe another characteristic, another parameter of Torah. When it comes to water, the Torah Chazal explained, why are words of Torah compared to water? Just like water gravitates downwards, not like fire which gravitates upwards. Water, if you put it in a high place and on a slope, it'll slope downwards. So too, the words of Torah cannot be retained unless somebody is humble. He's feels himself low. This means that mayim, water, is not a metaphor for the actual, for the essence of Torah. The water represents the bittul and the lowliness that is necessary when learning Torah. Und lei dem is verantwortlich das, was der Medrash anal sagt, nisreiken beire shal Yaakov, ein boy divrei Torah. This will answer the question with regards to what the Medrash says, that the well of Yaakov was emptied, it had no Torah in it. The children of Yaakov, the sons of Yaakov, did have Torah, and they did learn Torah. As the dinim of Torah, as at Norgi fell did inyan amayim shebet Torah. What they were lacking was the water of Torah, the bittul. The well was empty of water. It was empty of bittul. Later in Sivches, the Rebbe is going to elaborate a little bit more on this. Their bittul be'erech geidel malosam. What they were lacking was the bittul relative to their stature. Relative to the high level that they stood on, they were expected to have more bittul. Where do we see that bittul has to be proportionate to the stature of the person? As we learn, as we can understand from the bowings that have to take place during davening, which the bowings represent bittul. As they say, the order is Kereya bebaruch. When a person says the word Baruch Ata Hashem, he bows. V'zoykif b'shem. And when he says the word Hashem, he straightens out. But a king, the halacha is that a king, once he bows, he does not straighten himself out until the end of davening. In other words, because the bowing represents bittul, and the king, because he's on such a high level, he is expected to have a greater bittul, that he bows and stays bowed. Similarly, the Shvatim were on this lofty level, and therefore they were expected a bittul. And when the pasuk says "Va'boyreik ein b'mayim," it's saying they were lacking the bittul. Earlier, we asked the question: what's the hechrich? Why is it so certain that if a person is lacking Torah, automatically there's nechashim v'akrabim? Now that question becomes even stronger now. Wie kommt es, als Eib nor ein bei mayim is bederach mamele nechashim v'akrabim yeshbei? How could you say that if there's no water, automatically there's nechashim v'akrabim? So the dem allein was beim limud feld blois der bittel v'shiflus. So beim werden die Metzias von nechashim v'akrabim am naget zu inyan atayra. Just because he's lacking bittel or lacking shiflus to feel low, this should automatically create the existence of snakes and scorpions, something that opposes the idea of Torah. If you were to tell me that if a person didn't learn any Torah, automatically he's creating space for nechashim v'akrabim, even that we asked on. Why? Why is it automatic? But here's more than that. Person is not lacking Torah. He's lacking the bittul when learning Torah. So are you saying that automatically it creates nechashim v'akrabim because of the lack of bittul? Their beard in them. So in Sif Hey and on, the Rebbe is going to explain why bittul is so fundamental to the learning of Torah, and this will answer this question: why Mayim Ein Boi and the Chashem V'Akrabim Yes Boi is an automatic consequence, and it'll also answer our questions to understand the questions that we asked in the beginning of the Sikha. Meaning to say, the question that we had. We started answering this question that Yosef's. The question was Yosef's brothers were acting al pitoira in their minds. So we already answered that they were lacking bittul, but we'll understand that a little bit better. Additionally, we also asked the question. What how to connect, like we just spoke, how to connect Mayim Einbay and Nechashim V'Akrabim Yeshbay in an automatic way. Once we understand why bittul is so important, we'll understand the connection. Der Bier in dem. Der Iker von Teire is as durch dem Limud verbindt man sich mit Neis Teire. This is the key. The primary aspect, or the primary goal of learning Torah is that through the learning of Torah, we connect with the Noisen HaTorah, with the giver of the Torah, meaning the Eibishter. Und der Riber is der Inyan von Bittul v'Shiflus atnai ikri. And therefore Bittul and Shiflus, feeling low, is a fundamental, it's a primary condition in this process. If a person is his own entity, is in the Agbolos von Anivra, he is limited to the limitations, to the boundaries of a created being. And therefore he can't connect to the Eibishter, who is infinite. The person is limited. He can't reach the unlimited. But when the person learning, is in a mode, in a state of total bittul, and thus goes out of his own personal boundaries and limitations, only then can he reach the infinite level, the limitlessness of the Eibishter who gave the Torah. So this is a very, very fundamental thing. And that is that the person is trying to reach something that's out of his reach. So as long as he's only using his own powers and his own strengths to reach that, he's never going to reach it because it's not in his reach. But once he recognizes that it's out of his reach and he subjugates or subdues himself to the Eibishter, then he's able to reach beyond himself and to reach to the Neis Torah. That's what bittul does. Bittul allows the person to go outside of his own limitations and reach the Neis Torah. At this point, the Rebbe is going to explain two things with regards to learning Torah, two aspects with regards to learning Torah that are understood because of this foundation, because of this rule or this concept that the ultimate goal is to reach the Neis Torah, and therefore you need to have bittul. This will explain to us two very beautiful ideas in learning Torah. Number one, what we're going to understand is the order in this request that we say every day in a Lakai Nitzoyer. V'nafshi ka'afar la'keltia, may my soul be like dust to all. Pesach libi b'seirasecha, open my heart to your Torah. L'cha'era, why does it have to be understood? Because seemingly there's a very basic question. Limud Torah, psach libi b'seirasecha, learning a Torah. Muzdach zay mitakoch. It's got to be with a passion. You have to be excited about it. Ube'avana v'asoga. And also, you have to understand what you're learning. Both passion or excitement, as well as understanding and intellect, only can happen if his seichel and his other faculties are recognized. Whereas the nafshi kafar la koilti is shoylelum mevatel zay mitzias. When he says, "May my soul be like dust to all," he's breaking and negating his existence. Astirat zu kochen sich v'havana v'chulu b'Torah, seemingly a contradiction to the passion and excitement in learning Torah. If you say v'nafshi kafar la koilti, means no seichel, no midas. So if there's no midas, there's no excitement, there's no passion, there's no seichel, there's no understanding. How do you reconcile the two? How can you say, I want to be so like dust that negates my seichel, my midas, and at the same time say I want to learn Torah with a passion and with understanding. But now that we understand the importance of bittul, we now understand what we're saying. Teira Shalcha, when can my heart be opened to your Teira? To recognize that it's your Teira. When can he be a receptacle to receive the Eibishter's Teira, which is infinite? Daf Kedan, when by him is freer Dader Bittel Nikel Vakel. Only if prior to that, he starts out with a total bittul. Nitztam bittul, not just a regular bittul, nor ka'ofar lakoil, like dust, because hakoil doshin olav, which everybody tramples on the dust, which is a total negation of his existence. Through this bittul, he becomes ready, prepared to be able to receive the Eibishter's Teira. Und danach, only then kommt Yagaita, the toil, durch the Yegias Adam Besichlei, when a person toils and works hard with his Seichel, Nemter Tirase Shalakaz Baruch Hu, then he could receive the Eibishter's Teira durch seine Keches Apnimium through his personal faculties. Psach libi b'seidasecha, my heart, my passion, my understanding, open it up for your Teira. But that can only happen once you started out with Bittul. So if you started with Pesach Libi, then you wouldn't be able to get anywhere. You're only able to learn as much as your mind can grasp. But when you go to start out with Nafshi Kafar Lakiltia, you start out with the Bittul. Once you have the Bittul, then you can connect to the Eibishter's Teira. Then you could bring down this Eibishter's Teira even into Libi, even into your personal Seichel and Midas. That's one thing that we understand based on this importance of Bittul. Sivav is going to focus on another point. This will answer a perplexing concept that we find by learning Torah, which is, as in Dibur fun Torah is the Amayr legabe Avanas Torah, that speaking words of Torah have an advantage over understanding Torah. Where do we see this? Their din is, as Hamaharer b'divrei Torah ein tzarech levarech birchas Torah. Somebody is just thinking words of Torah, but not saying them, not articulating them, he does not have to make birchas Torah. While here, like a diburu, because halacha rules that thinking is not like speaking. Another halacha, similar halacha, kol masha loimed behir levat, anything that a person learns behir by thinking, ve'evsher le'lahitzi b'svasav, which he could have articulated in words, and he didn't. He has not fulfilled his mitzvah of learning Torah. The Alter Rebbe, one of the sources for this is Alter Rebbe, Hilchos Talmud Torah. He's saying in the beginning of the halacha, he's saying that a person should always read it out loud. Whether it's Mikra, whether it's Mishnah, whether it's Talmud, a person should always read the words of Torah out loud. And then he says, because if you didn't say the words out loud and you could have, you do not fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah. Nochmer, let's go a step further. The Havana von Torah is verbunden mit dem Dibur von Torah. To understand Torah properly, it is dependent on the words of Torah. The Chazal sagen, auf dem Pasuk, Chayim heim l'moitz ehem. Chazal teaches on the Pasuk, they are life to those who find them. The words of Torah are a life source to those who find them. Says the Gemara, Al tikre l'moitz ehem, el l'moitzi ehem bepeh. Instead of reading the words l'moitz ehem, which means to their finder, read l'moitzi ehem, to those who express them with words, those who articulate them with words. In other words, you want to learn Torah and understand the Torah well. The best way to do so is by saying out the words. And then there's another Gemara over there. Imarucha nitnar bepen abramache varim shalcha mishtameres. The Gemara over there is talking about Bruria, the wife of Reb Meir. She saw a Talmud who was learning in a whisper. So she kicked him. And she said to him, there's a pasuk, arucha bakoil ushmura. If it's organized in everything, then it's secured. So she told him that if you if you learn the Torah with all of your limbs, you use your whole body to learn Torah, then mishtameres, then the Torah is secured, it's preserved. V'im lav, but if not, if you're just whispering it and it seems like it's something that's coming off your lips and it's not something that's permeating your body, it is not secure. So we see we see number one, the first half of the paragraph tells us that you're not yotzer your mitzvah and you can't make a bracha for learning Torah unless you're saying words. And the second half of the paragraph is telling us if you want to truly understand Torah, you need to use words. Now comes the question: if a person is learning Torah Sheba'al Peh and he doesn't understand what he's saying, is there psak din in Shulchan Aruch as ein nechser limud klal? The Shulchan Aruch says this is not considered learning. Does say that the Indian limud Torah Sheba'al Peh verstehen verstehen das was man lernt. When learning Torah Sheba'al Peh, the whole purpose is to understand. The why is it so important to say out the words? And so much so that if the words, if the verbal articulation is lacking, is late. Not only you don't have to make a bracha. When you don't fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah. Not only do you not yotzer your mitzvah, not only do you not make a bracha, but the Torah that you did learn, that you did understand, won't remain. It won't be retained. In other words, what is so powerful about the words, about the dibur, over the Havana without words, over understanding without words, is the Azvara in them. So now that we understand what we said earlier, that the idea of Torah is to connect to the Noisen Torah, now we'll understand why words are so important. The Rikir von Torah is therefore was not durch Torah, but not Torah. The whole, the most important part of Torah is the bond that we have with the Eibishter, the giver of the Torah. Und der Fahr muss euch der Limud der Torah sein, in an Eufen as die Avone Vassage von der Minyan. And therefore, when you learn Torah, it should be done in a way that the grasp and understanding of it is need wie es is mitzad geder aseichel von anivra. It shouldn't be limited to the finite understanding of a created being. Nor vi das is mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu, teraseh shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you learn Torah, even the part that you do understand, you shouldn't suffice by understanding it on a human level. You should understand it on the level of the Eibishter, which the Eibishter, the perspective of the Eibishter. And here he adds a very, very important detail. Therefore, about learning Torah. Therefore, is move on. As is nit maspik dit nur von bittel. Blois als a hakdam zu limud Torah. The first detail that Rebbe brought up here, v'nafshi kafar lakel tia psach libi b'seira sacha. The Rebbe was saying that you need bittul as a hakdam, as a preparation to learning Torah. Here the Rebbe says that's not enough. It's not enough to learn Torah, to learn as a to have bittul as a preparation. Nor der lernen allein muss sein in an from bittul. The learning itself has to be also in a state of bittul. Und der Riber muss der Limud sein in an von lemoitzi am bepeh, and therefore it has to be articulated in words. Bis arucha b'ramachivarim, and it has to permeate. It has to utilize. It has to be spread out in all of the limbs of the body. What's pshat? What's the connection? Pshat sayid lernen Torah nomen sein kech haseichel, die hechste meile von der Menschen. When a person learns Torah only with his own seichel, which seichel, by the way, is the highest quality of the human being, bleibt noch in sein Metzias. Nevertheless, even though he uses his best quality to learn Torah, he still remains within his own person, within his own existence. Als Mensch. Und kann nicht keilen sein Torah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he cannot grasp the Torah of the Eibishter. And the Rebbe brings a very interesting comparison. A muscle from an elephant going through the eye of a needle. In the Gourarie in Brachas, the Gemara says over there that a person dreams at night of that which he thought about during the day. And therefore something that you don't think about during the day will not end up in your dreams. And the Gemara gives an example. That's why a person does not dream about an elephant going through the eye of a needle, because since it is impossible, since it is impossible, therefore a person can't even dream about it. So the Rebbe now uses that as a very interesting comparison. Ma'adoch apil, v'schot it is a mugbel. Ma'adoch an elephant that, despite the fact that it is a limited creation. Von deswegen Jesus Kupa de Machte is kleiner. Von is in ganzen aufgefleckt as in the Kupa de Machte. Since the eye of the needle is smaller than the elephant, it is impossible for the elephant to go into the eye or through the eye of the needle. It is so impossible that it can't even show up in a dream. Allah has kama v'kama. As Teira was is verbunden mit der Kadosh Baruch Hu. Shashua ya melech ba'atzmusay. How much more so Teira that is connected with the Eibishter. Teira is one of the things that the Eibishter takes personal pleasure from it. Shishua means like something that you play with, something that you have pleasure from. Ba'atzmusay with Eibishter in his essence. Der Blig v'lo aniti. So certainly it can't enter into the limited seichel, into the limited intellect of the human being. And therefore it cannot be retained. It cannot last by the person, as he is in his limited state. The Gemara finishes over there after the story of Gourarie. As Talmud Echad, the Belazar had a student, he used to learn in a whisper, and after a few years, he forgot what he was learning, because it was all about his seichel. And the fact that he was shoyne belachash, the fact that he was whispering, it means that it was something that hadn't permeated him beyond his seichel, and therefore he didn't connect to anything beyond. But when you connect the learning with your mouth, and even lower than that, with the other limbs of the body, which they are lower than seichel, which, as we said before, seichel is the highest quality of the person. The limud is in a way that a person descends, goes down lower from his stature, from his high point. And it permeates all of his 248 limbs. This negates his own existence. Only then can the Eibishter's infinite Torah become absorbed in him in a permanent, in a deep way. Then his Torah is protected. So the Rebbe established for us that the ikir of learning Torah is the connection with Hashem, with the Neis Torah. And therefore, when we learn Torah, it doesn't suffice to learn Torah the way we understand it. We have to learn Torah as the Neis Torah has given it to us. So we have to go outside of our limitations. And in order to go outside of our limitations, we have to have bittul, both as a preparation to learning Torah, and also while we're learning, we have to bring the learning down into words and into our avarim, into our limbs, so that it's not just about what I understand, but it's the words, saying words. People say tehillim, or words that sometimes a person repeats. A person doesn't understand what they're saying. It sometimes feels empty. So why does it feel empty? Because you're not connecting to it. But when you're learning Torah with words, what you're doing is you're saying the lowest part of me is learning Torah. It's not about what I could understand and grasp. It's about me learning Torah. And once you have that bittul, I said me sounds like not bittul, but once a person is learning Torah, even with his but with seichel, but also l'moitziayim b'peh, he uses his mouth and he uses his other evarim, which means that he's learning with a bittul. Then and only then can the Torah remain with him, because he's able to reach outside of his limitations and reach Teiraseh Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In Sif Ches, we're going to go back to our questions. We said, what's the hechrich that just because ma'im boy automatically nechashim v'akrabim yes boy, especially if you say that it means bittul. So just because a person is lacking bittul, automatically it means he has nechashim v'akrabim. That was our question. Now I'll understand. I'll please, that's very good verstandig. It's well understood that in Maimer Chazal ma'im ein boy have nechashim v'akrabim yes boy. Ukenal der pirus in them as eib nor ma'im ein boy is b'derech mamele nechashim v'akrabim yes boy, as we explained earlier, that if he doesn't have water, automatically nechashim v'akrabim. Wie bald as the Dikir von Teira is der Verbund mit der Teira, since, as we said at length throughout the Sikha, that the primary goal of Teira is to connect with the Teira, was kommt durch ein Bittel von dem Leimed, which comes to the Bittel of the learner. The Riber is in them talking out of therefore there's no room for a middle ground, for a neutral space. Oder bei ihm ist da der Bittel zum nächsten Teire und demult ist mechaven in sein Limud Lamitas shel Teire, wie sie ist der Ratzen von dem nächsten Teire. Either he has the Bittel, and then his learning is aligned with the truth of Teire, as is the will of the Eibishter, the giver of the Teire. Oder or if he lacks the bittul, demult felt by him the shaykhs from this Teira, then he lacks a connection to the giver of the Teira. But Mikosh came the Kalvachemer from the Pila B'Dayal B'Kupa D'Machta Canal, as we said before, it's a Kalvachemer from the fact that an elephant can go into the eye of the needle. How much more so a yid without bittul cannot, the Teira cannot go inside that yid. And therefore, like we said before in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that if you turn away from Hashem immediately, you're serving idols. So too, if you don't have the shaykhs to the Neis Natera, the connection to the Eibishter, automatically that space is filled with something else. Not only that he can't connect to the Torah, you won't find Torah by the arrogant people. Nor is there meat Nechashim v'akrabim represent the fact that by not having bittul, he opposes the holiness, the sanctity of Torah. Ukmaimer Chazal, as Chazal tell us, the person that is arrogant, he and I, meaning the Eibishter and that person, cannot dwell in the same world. So automatically he's pushing the Eibishter out with his arrogance. Or Nachmar, even more than that, in the Gemara in Seita, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that Kol Adam sheyes begasas haruach, somebody that has arrogance, kilo eved v'dis kechavim, and the Rambam says Kol hamagbiya libay kofar beikar, anybody that has an arrogant heart has denying the existence of Hashem, which is va'avadatem, which is the very definition of idolatry. So if you don't, now it makes perfect sense. If you don't have bittul, then you have arrogance. If you have arrogance, not only is there no room for Torah in your life, not only is there no room for the Eibishter in your life, but you're actually denying the existence of the Eibishter and you're serving idols. Visartem va'avadetem. That answers the first question. And this is the conclusion of the answer with regards to the brothers of Yosef. As Nisreikin Beirish Shal Yankiv Ein Beidivrei Torah, that Yaakov's well was emptied, his children didn't have Torah. And we asked the question, they were operating in their mind, according to the rules of Torah. So he says, exactly. They weren't lacking the learning of Torah. And that which they did, as far as they were concerned, they were following the din. So at aber bazei gefällt be'erach gedel malosam der inyan von mayim shebetera. But compared to their level, they were lacking the mayim, their bittul. They were lacking the proper bittul to learning for their level. And because of that, ultimately, their ruling with regards to Yosef's punishment was incorrect. They made a mistake. They thought they were going al pitayda, but they made a mistake. Why did they make a mistake? Because they were lacking bittul. So, and from this we see how vital and how important the bittul is to learning Torah and to be mechaven lamitasa shel Torah, to align your learning to the truth of Torah, as is the ratzon of the Eibishter. It only works if you have bittul. So Ad Kan is the deeper and rich explanation in understanding the two pshatim in this pasuk, either nechashim v'akrabim yeshbei or divrei Torah ein boi, and the way we explained it, that one is, if you don't have mayim, automatically, if you don't have Torah, automatically you have nechashim v'akrabim, and we explained that the necessity is bittul, because the whole goal is to connect to the Neis Torah, and for that you need bittul, and therefore if a person doesn't have bittul, then he can't reach the essence of the Torah, and therefore automatically it will allow, it creates a space for arrogance, which allows the forces that oppose Torah. It actually brings a person to Avodah Zarah, and this explains also why Yosef's brothers, what was so terrible with what they did. They were lacking bittul. Ein by divrei Torah means they were lacking the bittul to learning Torah, and therefore they came to the wrong conclusion with regards to Yosef's punishment. In Sif Tes, the Rebbe is going to explain to us that this bittul that is necessary for learning Torah begins primarily at the time of Matan Torah, when the Eibusher gave the Torah. Die Sipurim von unserer Parsha wegen die Murais von Yosef und seine Brüder. These stories in the Parsha of Yosef and the brothers, seine Akdama zu Golus Mitzrayim, are a preparation to Golus Mitzrayim. Golus and Yitzias Mitzrayim. Warum Mechilas Yosef hat geführt zu der Jude von Yaakov one of Mitzrayim? Because the fact that Yosef was sold, it led ultimately, eventually, that Yaakov and his sons should go down to Mitzrayim. But their tachlis is the Rinya from Matan Torah, and then later they left. And the whole goal of Golus Mitzrayim and Yitzias Mitzrayim was Matan Torah. Similarly, with regards to this concept, this discussion that we had, that there was no water, there was no Torah, but there were nechashim v'akrabim, things that oppose Torah, was the Torah learned to us in the parsha, which is being taught to us in this parsha. And thus, from Matan Torah, this is relevant to the whole concept of Matan Torah. But the Rinja von Mayim Shebetera, the bittul was father sich beim Lemet bechtet zu verbinden mit sich mit Nesna Torah, because this bit Mayim, this water that we're talking about, which is the bittul that is necessary that the learner should have in order to connect with the Nesna Torah, hat sich beikir aufgetan bei Matan Torah, primarily was accomplished at Matan Torah. The Rebbe explains. Der Chelek zwischen dem Limud HaTorah von die Avos vor Matan Torah und dem Limud HaTorah von die Bonim nach Matan Torah. What is the difference between the Torah that was learned by the Avos, as we know, that the Avos, Mimeim Shel Avosayim Leparsha Yeshiva Meim, I think the Rebbe is going to mention that in a moment. Yes, that the Avos learned Torah, and then of course after Matan Torah, their descendants learned Torah. What is the difference? Far Matan Torah is the Limud Given B'Koyach Atzmei. Before Matan Torah, the learning was with a person's own strengths. But because it wasn't a mitzvah, it wasn't a commandment from the Eibishter. The person can only reach as far as a person can reach. The accomplishment of Matan Torah was that the Eibishter gave us the Torah. The Torah vizi is Terase shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'Yeshua Melech Ba'atzmusei is he giving given to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to jeden Niden. The Torah, the essence of the Torah, as the Eibishter takes pleasure from it, in his very essence, was given to every single Yid. We understand the Reich von Psak as jeder Yid, when jeden Tag is mechuyev sagen birchas HaTorah, as is understood from the halacha that every single Yid, every single day, has to say birchas HaTorah. Why? He says v'nasam lanu terasi, because the Torah was given to every single Yid, and therefore every Yid could reach terasi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which didn't exist before Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah was only Terase of the person, as far as the person can reach. After Matan Torah, the Eibusher gave every single Yid the ability to reach Terase Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Before we conclude this Nakuda, we're going to elaborate on it. Das ist Rabbi in the Maimer Chazal betchilo yamesha lematero mashakcha ashnit leib matana, which will explain the Maimer Chazal that says that at the beginning, says the pasuk Vayitn al Moshe kechaloisei, that Eibusher gave the luchos to Moshe Rabbeinu. So Chazal say at first Moshe was learning Torah and he kept on forgetting it, until the Torah Vayitn loy, Torah was given to him as a present. Was the is tamua. Ich far Matan Torah hat man gelernt Torah. Wie Chazal sagen, mit Menschen lebe sehen in der Parasha Yeshiva Meim, even before Matan Torah, they were learning Torah. Und es doch passt, dass sie nicht vergessen, was sie haben gelernt. We forgot that anders in the Shaykh the limud and from yeshiva. Certainly they didn't forget what they learned. Otherwise you can't call it a yeshiva. A yeshiva is a place where you learn Torah which you're going to retain. So why is it that after Matan Torah, Moshe was forgetting the Torah? You would think before Matan Torah, which was they were sort of in the dark in a certain sense because it was coming from themselves. Maybe they would forget it. No, it's fakert. The others learned Torah and didn't forget. Moshe, who's after Matan Torah, is forgetting Torah. No, the beard in them. The limit for Matan Torah is given in the Bechina from Torah vis Berach Abriya. Learning of Torah before Matan Torah was Torah as it is limited to creation. It was a smaller Torah. And therefore was able to be absorbed on an internal level because it was less to absorb. But by Matan Torah, the Eibusher gave us Torah v'zis in ganzen Hecher from the Bria as it totally transcends creation. But a Nivra can which a created being cannot grasp it on his own level. And therefore Moshe was forgetting it. That we said before, that if the Torah is not learned in a way with a proper bittul, it cannot be retained. So Moshe was trying to reach the higher level of Torah, but he was coming from the wrong place, so to speak, and therefore he was forgetting it. The Eibishter gave his infinite Torah, the Torah Baruch Hu, to Moshe Rabbeinu. Chazal teach us that whenever someone gives, they give generously. He gave it as a gift. A gift doesn't come because you paid for it. A gift comes beyond anything you deserve. So the Eibusher took this Torah that's beyond limitations and gave it over to a limited creature. Every single Yid has the ability to internalize the Torah and to retain it. Because he gave us his Torah. Because the Eibusher gave it to us as a matana. So the Torah of after Matan Torah is much bigger, which is why initially Moshe couldn't grasp it. But then the Eibusher gave the matana a gift that even though it was so big, it should still be understood, grasped by the created being, by Moshe or the Yidden, and therefore it's possible. But on the other hand, bittul is still necessary. In other words, just because the Eibusher gave it to us does not negate the necessity of bittul. Warum? Because since the whole concept is that person should work for something, not that it should come as free bread, free lunch. Therefore, the person has to do something on his end to make him worthy, to some degree at least, to be able to grasp the Torah. The person's, what does the person do on his part? The bittul. In other words, even with bittul, if the Eibusher decided to not give it to you, then you wouldn't grasp anything. But the Eibusher gave it to us, and he gave it to us as a present. We have to do our part. This is the bittul, and when we have our bittul and we have the gift of the Eibusher, together we can grasp the Torah of after Matan Torah, which is the bilti gvul, the infinite part of Torah, the unlimited, the limitless part of Torah, which is what was given to us by Matan Torah. So this took us to the next step, that not only is this a concept in general, but this is something that was given to us by Matan Torah, the ability to be able to grasp the highest levels of Torah as long as we do the bittul from our part. In Sif Yud, which is the last Sif of the Sikha, we're going to go back to the concept of Chanukah. If you remember in the beginning of the Sikha, the Rebbe pointed out that this Beirek Ein B'Mayim is taught inside the Sugya of Chanukah in the Gemara in Shabbos, and we said that they must be connected. Because nothing that's in Torah is by chance. So what's the connection between Va'boirek Ein B'Mayim and Chanukah? But now that we understand this concept of bittul and the fact that there is a part of Torah that is Terasei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is higher than a person could reach without the Eibusher's gift, without the bittul, we can now understand the connection to Chanukah. Alpiko and all, ich move in the kesher zwischen der Maimer Chazal, Maim Ein Bei V'chulu. Mit Dinyan for Chanukah, was ich der Fire bringt us the Gemara in the Sugya for Chanukah. Now we'll understand this, and we'll not know why it's brought in the Sugya. Says Yodua der Asber from the Diyu Kalosh, it's known that it's explained the lashon, the expression in the Menusach from Valanissim, Ksham the Malchushav and Resha, that the evil Greek kingdom stood up, Lahashkicham Teira Secha, to make them forget your Torah. As the Yevanim haben gewollt machen, vergessen bei ihnen nie die Etzem Chachma v'Seichel von Torah. Abreisen sie von Limud Torah bechlal. They weren't trying to make Yidden forget the intellectual part of Torah, that they shouldn't learn Torah at all. No, das was Torah is Torah's son, Torah Secha, Torah's Hashem. What the Greek wanted to do was break away the Yidden from the fact that this is the Eibishter's Torah, that is your Torah. That's why they defiled the oil. They didn't destroy it, they just defiled it. For Shemin is beginning from Chachma. Shemin represents Chachma. What they wanted to do is not to get rid of wisdom. They wanted to take away the holiness out of the wisdom. They agreed that Yidden should retain the oil, the wisdom, the learning of Torah. They wanted it to be impure, defiled oil. It should not be something that is being done because of the holiness of Torah, because of a connection to the Eibusher, the giver of Torah. Und das ist einer von den Timen, was der Eibishter gemacht dem Nas, aber so gefunden in Apach v'Shem Torah, which is one of the reasons why the Eibishter made a miracle, that they should find the pure oil. Hagam as mitzadem was tuma hutere b'tzibur, hat man gemerkt, madlik sein, die Menöde mit Shem and Tomei, even though Pi halacha, they were allowed to use the defiled oil, because the halacha is that if the whole tzibur is Tomei, or if the tumah affects the tzibur, you're allowed to do something even that's Tomei. Weil der Nitzochen von Chanukah besteht in dem, als soll sein Teirasecha Hashem and Torah. Because the victory of Chanukah consists of the fact that it should be holy oil. It should be pure oil. It should be something that the learning should be imbued with the fact that it's the holiness of Torah, the Eibishter's Torah. Und dann wie gerät früher bei ihnen Mayim Einbei. Es darf gedurcht am Ihnen am Mayim Svetera, the Bittel zum nächsten Torah. Is men bewahren von Nechashim v'akrabim Yesbei, as we explained at length in the Sikha, that only through the Bittel to the Eibishter can you be protected from the snakes and the scorpions. Al derech zeh is in the minion von Chanukah. Similarly, in the concept of Chanukah, as daf gedruckt that adloka von edes Chanukah shem and Torah, only by kindling the pure oil to light the lamps of Chanukah. Vert karli the digla the tarmudoi tarmud eisius meiredes. This finishes off. This stops. Literally means the feet of the Tarmudai people that would hang out in the streets. So the Gemara says that when they're not there anymore, that's the end of menorah lighting time. So Chassidus explains Tarmud Eisius Meiredes. The word Tarmud is the same letters as the word Meiredes, which means the rebel. That the candles of Chanukah stop the feet of the rebels. Because man is felt in the minion von Shem and Torah Teirasecha, he's noch als Damok and Farmerida Miredes and the Mebishten Vesartem Vedetem. As long as you're lacking the purity of the oil, the recognition that the Torah is the Eibishter's Torah, there's still room to rebel against the Eibishter, which, as we connect it back to the Baal Shem Tov, when you're lacking the Bittul, Va'avadetem, then there's an union of Merida, rebelling in the Eibishter. But when you have the Shem and Torah, the pure olive oil, and you light the candles of Chanukah on the outside of your house, so that it illuminates the outside, this ends this rebellion, even from the streets, from the place where rebellion usually grows. Betachas hashleimus entirely, as we in ganzen mechala dominion from Meredes nafilu the riglu the tarmadoy bechinas hayesat tachtena, that we totally finish off, we totally end the concept of rebellion, even the feet of the rebels, meaning even the lowest level of rebellion. Everything is overcome by the light of the menorah and by the purity of the menorah, by the fact that it's the Eibishter's Torah, to the point that we could illuminate the darkness of the Galus, and we can bring down the Geula ha'amitis v'ashlema b'karav mamish. A freilichen Chanukah.